Hello.
Cheryl.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
First of all, obviously, thank you so much for doing this because I think that anybody who listens to this is going to get a tremendous amount of value from it. So I'm super excited to have you, and I'm
Thank
really
you.
honored and thankful that you're willing to do this and share your whole life with me.
Mm,
Whoever's listening. So I was thinking that it would be a good idea to just start out with where you are right now, who you are right now, just a brief spotlight of like your now. And then we'll go back to the beginning and find out how you got here.
Okay.
Maybe. And I know it's a really exciting time of your life. You are fulfilling a dream because I remember years ago when you said to me, I always wanted to write this children's book. I have this book in my head. It's here and I have to write it. And so now you've done it. So
Yep.
tell us a little bit about what's going on and we'll go from there.
This week in particularly is the life full circle moment for me. Next Friday, we head out of town to my husband's running in the Marine Corps Marathon. And then we're doing this big loop. So I'll be going to New York to visit my daughter, to Philadelphia to meet one of our high school friends who is arranging for me to do a book signing at her church. And it's a church she works at. It's this tiny little church. The pastors decided, like, let's make this a community event. Okay. They're like, we want children to read. We want people to do this, please, please, please. I was like, sure, this is great. From there, head back to our hometown in Pennsylvania. And I'm doing a book signing and a school visit at the middle and high school that I attended. And so it's so bizarre to think that, okay, I mean, I still have a hard time. My husband laughs at me all the time because he's like, when people say, what do you do for a living? And he's like, author, say the word.
That's
and
right.
and it's strange. It's just strange to say it. It doesn't quite feel real yet. As I sit here and I'm signing books while I was waiting, and it's like,
I love it.
okay, this is just very strange to be considered a children's author. I actually won a Mom's Choice Award, which was so shocking. When I did this whole process of writing, I wasn't quite sure where it was going or where I wanted it to go because I couldn't compare it to, like, I couldn't critique my work to say, okay, it should go further. So we live in South Carolina, right outside of Charlotte now, and I love it.
Oh, great.
I have two of my kids and their children live close by. So I'm very hands-on with them. I'm kind of the backup if anybody gets sick and needs extra rides. And, yesterday was one of our grandson's birthdays. And it was like, well, I'm going to pick him up from school early because we're going to the park.
Oh, that's so great. So I'm just going to hold up the book. I love it so much because the message, kindness grows friendship, right? Kindness
Right.
grows friendship. I just that's such an important message. I think it's a book that's for adults as well as children. And I loved the way that you peppered in all the Italian through the book. So we'll get back to the book when we get to we'll go backtrack to the beginning and we'll come back up and we'll address this again at the end. So we'll come full circle on that. So let's go back to the day, time, place you were born and just talk a little bit about that. Where did it all start?
So most of my family, mom and dad's side, were from the Jersey area. And it's actually really funny because I was born in New Jersey. I've never lived in New Jersey. My mom loved her obstetrician so much that for 2 weeks prior to each child's birth, she went to her parents' house, hoping she'd go into labor there so she could have her own doctors.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny because it was, an hour and a half, 2 hours from where we lived. And it worked all three times. So both my brothers and I, so we were all born in New Jersey and not one of us have ever resided there. Grew up in the Poconos. I lived in the first house, I think, till I was 2. And I have the slightest memory of that house because there was a house fire there.
Ooh.
And
While you were living there?
yeah.
Wow.
And I remember my mom and dad grabbing my older brother and I out. And like, that's the only memory
Wow.
I have there. And then we lived in 2 houses in Stroudsburg. But ironically, I'm still friends like you with many people from there, which my husband is always amazed. He's like, you have people that since you were 3 years old
Yep.
and we're still friends with them. And
Yep.
that's kind of funny because I always thought of our hometown when we lived there, like, especially when, became teens, it was like, oh gosh, I just want to get out. I want to get out. I want to get out. It's too small. And now I look back on it as it was really a great place to raise a family, the memories and the freedoms that we had then that our children would never have now. They just couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are
So,
so different.
I'll just tell the audience, you you did live in a house right up the street from me
Mhm.
when we were in high school. Probably that was your second house there.
Yep.
So I just want to ask you about the fire, because that seems significant. Like, is that your earliest memory?
Probably. It probably, and it was, we lived in Marshall's Creek at the time.
But you just never went back to that house. You didn't rebuild it.
No, it was a fire in the kitchen, and I guess it had to have been significant enough that they made the move. And then we lived in that second house for a long time.
Were you sleeping at the time?
I don't know. The memory I have is being carried out,
Okay.
so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The memory is my mom and dad, one holding me, one holding my brother, and leaving. So yeah,
So that's interesting. And
it
then so
is.
you moved into another house. And so you were about 2 until what age?
Almost 13.
Okay. So that was your elementary school years.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about those years. So
So those were fun. So I am one of the strange kids that did the public school until the end of 5th grade. Then I went to Catholic school, and then I graduated at public school. So I did the flip flop. I went to a really cool little elementary school, Ramsey, and I loved it because it was in the middle of a neighborhood. And I don't know why that just always struck me that it was literally in the middle of the neighborhood.
yes,
And I loved it. I loved,
traditional brick building, right?
yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it truly looked like a schoolhouse. I remember silly things about school. I fell in gym class. They had this metal apparatus thing that you could climb on. And when it was folded up, it stuck out about the wall this far, about 8 inches. And we were running in gym class. And I was just shooting my mouth off and talking to my friends, and went head first into it.
Oh my gosh.
Knocked myself out.
Oh my
I
God.
mean,
Oh,
my eye was bleeding.
oh
And
no.
this is how crazy and different the times were. My teacher called my parents and said, "Meet me at the doctor." And she drove me.
Wow.
And I mean, how different
Yeah.
times are now.
Well, at that time and in that neighborhood, that was right up the street from our downtown, our main street.
Yep.
I used to go down there as a child and walk around
Oh,
it.
yeah.
4th grade. I would walk
Yep.
around and on Main Street, and that's what we did.
Absolutely. And it just was such a different, safe environment. I mean, even the first house that we grew up in was a very wooded area, and we would play town chase at night, and we would ride bikes there was a little market, and it was one of those markets that had like the penny candy in the bins, and you could get your paper sack, and for a quarter you'd have a whole bag of candy. But it was not around the corner. I mean, it was a pretty good hike. We rode our bikes, and my husband and I still joke that when we were kids, particularly in the summer, you woke up, you did whatever you had to in the morning, you had your breakfast, did your chores, you went out to play, you came home for lunch, you went out to play, you came home for dinner.
Right.
And on my street, every one of the families had a different house call. My mom had a cowbell, and somebody else had a whistle, and somebody had a horn. And that was like, oh, your mom's calling. Everybody know whose parent it was.
I love that. And it sounds so old fashioned when you say it, but that's our childhood. We're not that old.
But we've seen a significant amount of change in our lifetime too.
Yes.
The childhood part is definitely the biggest thing, and the safety issues, and
Yeah.
not having to worry about them, and no cell phones.
How would you characterize your childhood school experience, like the elementary years?
I think elementary was great. For me, middle school was harder.
Aside from running into the playground.
Yeah, I was always accident prone. I mean, it's funny because that was one of the things as a kid. I was the stitches kid. My brother was the breaking the bones.
Okay.
My mom would joke that she knew the ER doctors at the hospital on a first name basis. And, again, flip it years, they probably would have said, "What are you doing to your kids?" And she's like, "They're being kids,"
I know, kids
And-
be kids, right?
Oh, yeah. I loved all of my teachers. My teachers were good and really nice people, outside of school.
Stands out like a teacher who may have influenced you in
So
those.
actually, a couple. I had one that she was my 2nd grade teacher, and her husband, they lived on some kind of a farm. Her husband was Mr. Stump. Isn't that funny? It was Mrs. Stem, Mr. Stump. It was like, okay, I'm not sure where that came from. But we would go to their family farm, like especially like fall time.
Mhm.
And we'd have like a picnic there or something, at your teacher's home. Again, not gonna happen now.
Probably not. I mean, maybe in some neighborhoods, I don't know.
No. And
But
Mrs. Quinlan was the teacher who took me to the doctor that day, and everybody thought she was so strict. And maybe I liked that part of her. I kind of, you knew where you stood.
yeah.
There were no gray areas. So I liked that part of her. But like on the day I got hurt, the level of kindness that she showed that day, I'm 57 years old. I still remember it. I still remember her putting the desks together and laying me down on it and finding a pillow for my head until she could get to the doctor, which is crazy.
We underestimate how the impact of those experiences in school, and especially the influence of our teachers.
Absolutely.
It's so significant when we get older. There's things we never forget. I love that. After elementary school, then you went through to middle school. So tell us about those years.
So middle school was probably the most difficult for me because when we started 5th grade, we were at a new open concept school. I did not like it at all. Like I found it too interesting to look at what the next class was doing.
All of the classrooms were open. There were no walls. So
Yeah, no walls.
yeah. So everything, you could hear the other classrooms, you could see the other classrooms.
Yep.
Interestingly, I remember they started to move that movable furniture and make walls
Right.
after they realized that maybe it wasn't such a good idea.
So I went from that huge exposure to, hundreds of students to a tiny, tiny little Catholic elementary school with very stereotypical religious educators, whether they were priests or nuns, some lay teachers.
Whose decision was it for you to move schools?
That was mine. I
Okay.
begged my parents to get me a change because I knew I wasn't going to be able to really stay focused.
Yeah.
And so I asked to switch. So I went to the Catholic elementary school for 6th grade, and then they switched it to the next was middle and high school together.
Okay.
So it was 5th grade in one school, 6th grade in another school, and then 7 through 11 were all in the same school.
What do you remember about that time in terms of like relationships or your own development? What stands out?
So it was interesting because I still lived in a house that primarily all of my friends went to public school. First year, like 6th grade, I did everything with neighborhood kids and school kids. Very few of those overlapped. And when we went to go to middle school, some of our sporting events overlapped a little bit more. Then it was, friends from both schools being friends with both schools, and particularly when we got to high school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a Catholic high school, but it was really just another school.
So you always had friends. That's kind of, I feel like that you were lucky that you had the friends from your neighborhood and the friends from school, like you had
Yeah.
double friends.
In some ways, very much.
So then in that time, you also moved into a new house.
Yep. So this was a very interesting thing. And it's funny, you do remember some details of what your parents did. My dad owned a carpet and interior, like wallpaper business.
Okay.
And my mom went back to school and got her interior design degree. And she saw this house plan in a Better Homes and Gardens magazine, where they put the whole, like where you can write to get the plans. She kept this half a page of the magazine page in her wallet for 6 years. And then my dad had it built for her.
You manifested it.
Oh, I mean, it was
That's like the
amazing.
original vision, people do that. They keep their vision.
Yep. And we joke all the time. It was my mom's dream house, and it was beautiful. Like she decorated it beautifully.
Well, your
It
house
was,
was known as it was a very beautiful house.
and it was fun because it became a holiday house for my family because I think I was in 9th grade when my great grandmother passed away. And before that, holidays we would drive to Jersey to see everybody. And then after she passed away, there wasn't really like anybody to do the gathering house. So the first Christmas after she passed away, my parents had everybody. And Mitzi, when I tell you there was a blizzard of all blizzards, we had everybody for a week.
Oh, that's so
sleeping
fun.
in the bathtubs, under tables. I mean, my parents had the snowmobiles, and they would be taking the snowmobile down to Wawa to get milk and bread and eggs to feed everybody. It was so funny, but it was
Great.
truly one of the coolest holidays.
You
And
have such a close family, it sounds like. I
we
mean,
do.
so you had your great grandmother, who you even had your great grandmother up until the ninth grade.
Right.
That's really
It
amazing.
was very significant. And she
Yeah.
was super significant in my life.
So tell us about that.
So she's awesome. She just made you feel like you were the only person in the room. It was my mom's grandmother. My great grandmother lived to be 92.
Wow, that's so great.
Yeah, so she's a great
You-
little Italian, and she loved to cook and bake.
So you had close relationship with your parents, obviously, close relationship with your grandparents and your great grandmother. So you just have so many positive influences. Sounds
I
like
did.
you had a great childhood experience and
Yeah,
growing up.
I mean, it really wasn't. You look back on things and think, oh, would you have liked it to be different? Certain things, sure. I mean, when the recession hit, it played havoc on my
In the
family.
80s.
And I look back on that now and I look at how great my parents handled that time of their life, because it was a really difficult financial time for them.
Yeah.
My brothers and I had no idea.
So when did
And
you find out?
when my parents lost their business, on the day they lost their business.
Wow. And this was in the 1980s.
Yeah, our senior year.
So
And I
what did
remember being floored because we didn't really get a warning. My parents shielded us from that part. And it's funny because I had a conversation with a high school friend not long ago who was his father and my father were good friends.
yeah.
And he told me about it from his dad's point of view,
Wow.
which was very humbling.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
So when my parents lost the business, we didn't move right away. We moved in the summer that I graduated. We knew we were moving. That wasn't a surprise. And frankly, I don't remember the day we moved. I have no memory of that day, but it must have been quick.
So they couldn't afford to keep the house.
Right. They sold the house. Somebody who bought the house wanted the house for years. They kept trying to get my mom and dad to sell it, and my mom wouldn't sell it. So the same family who wanted it got it, which was kind of nice. My friend said my dad was so heartbroken that he didn't get to say goodbye to your dad. And I remember like, well, why didn't he say goodbye? He says, well, just one day we woke up and you guys were gone. And it's funny because I don't remember that. And
Well,
you're in it, you're in the middle of it, you're moving. And it was a big move. We moved to North Carolina from Pennsylvania. But
right.
to hear him say this, how many years later, 40 years later,
Yeah.
and he said, my dad was just heartbroken that he didn't get to say goodbye to your dad.
So
And
your dad was trying to protect you all from this and probably felt some very deep shame.
sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
I
my
don't think to be very honest with you, I don't think he ever recovered completely from that. We moved on and
So you moved on. So then you moved, so your family moved and you had graduated. So then you're a young adult, and what happened next?
so before my parents told us that we were moving, I was like every other senior investigating colleges, and I wanted to get away from the cold. We used to vacation at Hilton Head and I loved it there. And I said, I want to go down south. I want to be down south. And my parents were like, it's 16 hours away and you're a homebody. Are you sure you want to do this? And so they made me make the decision from my point of view as though we were staying in the Poconos. They knew we were moving. I didn't know that. And so I said, yes. We enrolled. I was all set to go. We went for orientation. On the way home, we stopped in Raleigh and they said, do you want to go and do anything? We want to kind of look around. And there was a great big mall there. And like every other, 17-year-old girl, I was like, oh, I'll go shopping.
Yeah.
So they dropped me off at the mall and they went off. They picked me up. We're having dinner and they're just like, so what did you buy? And I was like, oh, a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. And I said, what'd you guys buy? Joking. And they said a house. And I was like, what? Today you bought a house? Where? Here? And they're like, yeah. And that's how we found out that we were moving there. So what happened was we moved to Raleigh. I lived in Raleigh for 7 days. And then I went to college in South Carolina, totally unprepared. And so when I went to college, it was overwhelming. So I just kind of stayed focused on college and classes. All of that changed in one day. I had a big lecture for English, and I just sat in the same seat every day. I just walked in, sat down. Well, the girl next to me did the same thing, and we had become friends. And one day the professor told me he needed to see me after class, and I was like, oh God, what'd I do? And he said, you need to move your seat. I was in the first row. I was like, why? And he says, well, you need to move your seat from the girl you're sitting next to. I was like, why? What's wrong? Like, I'm thinking something horrible has happened, you know? And he said, well, she's Black. And I said, I know. And he says, so you need to move your seat. And I'm looking at him like he's got 4 heads. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And he said, you know, you're going to get a bad name if you sit there. And I remember being so floored. I'm having a grown adult tell me to move my seat in a well-known university. And I'm going, huh. And I went to my next class. And during the next class, somebody made an announcement that that was the last day you could get 70% of your tuition back if you withdrew. And the whole time I'm in this class, they're teaching and I'm going, well, I know I'm not staying.
Wow.
And I was like, so I went, and this is the order in which I did it. The one who's the homebody, who doesn't do anything without getting her parents' permission, I withdrew from school first.
Wow.
And then I called my parents. My mom answered, and I asked to speak with my dad. My mom was more of the authoritative person. My dad was the softer side. He gets on the phone and I said, so what do you, this was a Friday night. And I said, what are you doing on Sunday? He's like, what do I need to be doing on Sunday? I said, you need to take a drive and come and get me.
Wow.
He's like, what happened? And I said, well, I have till Sunday at 6 to be out of the dorm. He's like, all right, start from the beginning. And I told him what happened. And he's like, no problem. He didn't even hesitate. And I was like, okay. I hung up. 20 minutes later, I get a phone call back, my dad again. He's like, we're getting in the car now. And it was a 6-hour drive. I think he made it in about 4.5 with a speeding ticket. And they just picked me up and it was like, no questions asked. We loaded everything in the car. And my parents' rule about college was my 2 brothers and I could pick where we wanted to go. They said that they would figure out the way of how to pay for it. But if we ever changed our mind, then college was on our dime. And so I'm in the parking lot of the dorm, piled high. And my parents said, you know the rule. I said, I do. And they said, this wasn't your fault, but you know the rule. And I said, I do. I said, let's go home. Eventually, I went to NC State for about 1.5 years, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do, which is kind of funny because I always took English classes and writing classes. Yeah, so that was my interesting college roller coaster.
Well, that is quite a trauma. It's like being thrown into the reality, you know. So did you ever talk to the girl?
No,
You just
I mean, it happened within hours. I mean, you know, it was like, I couldn't believe somebody who was well educated would say that. Now, like when I moved into the dorms and they did our kind of like buddy system nights and stuff, you know, they made sure to tell me that I was Catholic and Yankee and Italian, and those were probably not the best features for a Southern school. And I thought that was kind of funny, but I didn't think that much about it.
right.
But the South was different then. And it really was different. I just remember it being so far removed from anything my parents had ever taught me. Like when that happened, it was such, like, I knew my parents weren't going to be mad at me. I didn't even question it. I knew that they were going to be like, okay, right decision, get out.
Because you
And
had such a strong sense of values.
I just recently read on how you form your toddler years and how you shouldn't be always like, don't do this, don't do that, stop this, stop that, because they have to learn the consequences of their action. Now, obviously you do it in a safe environment, you know, if they're on the roof of the house, that's a problem, you know? But if they're climbing a couple of steps, you have to let them, even if they fall.
Yes.
And I feel like that's kind of what we did as kids. They let us fall.
Yes.
My mom told me 1,000 times, you know, I saw things as black and white. There was no gray in my life. It was this or this, this or this or this. She said, you'll see as you get older, the gray has to take over. But right now you're seeing black and white. And it wasn't until I became a mom that the gray started to come into my life.
So I'm curious about how the role that your grandfather played, because I know he influenced your book. Can you talk about your relationship with him growing up?
He was a fantastic individual. He loved life. He just embraced it. He's funny, he's kind, he's patient. He was just like the perfect grandfather. And the character that he made up, Gabalucci the wolf, was when my mom was a kid, and she has 2 siblings. And it was his way of teaching them a lesson. And I use this example a lot because it's the easiest one for people to understand is if you were nervous about going to school, he'd say, don't worry, Gabalucci's in your backpack. He's got you covered. You're never alone. And it was like little tidbits of life lessons like that, you know, and he'd reverse it to you like, so what do you think Gabalucci would do right now? You know, to make you think about what. So it was never like people say, did I write his story? There was no story. My story is completely made up.
Oh, okay.
It was always just the influence of this character
Yeah.
teaching you to be kind.
These life lessons.
Right.
And what's your grandfather's name? Just so
Zephyr, which is the best name ever.
It
We
is.
keep saying if we could have one more child, it'd be Zephyr. I'm trying to talk my pregnant daughter into it, but she's not going for it.
So what would you say are the biggest positive influences?
If you came to my house at Christmas, you'd never have to wonder what you were eating because it was pretty much the same every year. We would try to alter it every now and again with our kids. And my youngest is like, this is tradition. What are you doing? So it was always Italian based, always some form of pasta was Christmas Eve. But what we started with Christmas Eve is huge antipasta salads. You know, and I always butcher this word, charcuterie. Is that how you say it? Of the world started in our family. That was supposed to be the appetizer. And then you had this big pasta meal. Well, nobody ever ate the pasta meal because we ate so much of everything else. But it's always about food. Always. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you're already talking about what you're having for dessert for after dinner. You know, it was just always food. And it was always the smell of foods and the cooking with your family.
I think that's really special when food informs the family and it just has so much comfort. There's a lot of comfort in that.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's funny. Do you know what rhubarb is?
Yep.
Okay, so a lot of people don't know what that is.
Mhm.
My grandfather grew it when we were growing up. So we had rhubarb pies, all the strawberry and rhubarb pies, and people think I'm crazy. They're like, "You like that?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's the bomb. Like,
My
this
grandmother
is
used to make
so
it too.
good."
Yep, we used to grow it and make rhubarb pie as well.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, I
so it always seemed like it's a stalk.
yeah, I'm
And
not
so
quite sure. You boil it down. I don't know.
so then after you left college, you did a little bit of college in Raleigh, and then what happened next? Because obviously you met a wonderful man in there somewhere.
Not then.
Okay.
I met the not so wonderful man first.
Oh, all right. Into that.
Um, so met a guy in college. We dated for a long time. We were engaged for a year and a half. You'd think you'd know everything you know. Got married, started having kids, and it was a bad choice. I was Catholic. I was raised that, you know, you married for life, for better, for worse, meant something. When I said my vows, I thought very long and hard about every word I was saying and what I believed in. And then he was not the nicest to me physically. And I kept it a secret for a long time. I was married for 7 years. I left 7 times, like left 7 times and came back again and left and awful. But a lot of that came from, this was my decision. I went into it with my eyes open. I should have known better, blah, 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 blah. But there was a lot of mental control going on. And I really couldn't see it. I mean, truly, when people say that, everybody needs to understand they can't. Like physically, mentally cannot see it. When you are under somebody else's type of control like that, you are believing what they're telling you. And then you hear it so much, you believe it. And then I had young kids. And it's like, what do you do? How do you make that mix? And it wasn't until, and this again influences people in your life. I had the best obstetrician. When I was having my last child, I was supposed to have my tubes tied. And when they told me I needed to have the surgery, my doctor sat on the side of my bed and she took my hand. She said, we only have one more surgery left. And I'm thinking, what else? Like, what else what could you do? Like, I'm having a hysterectomy as a young woman. Like, what are you doing? And she said, I need to remove the 175-pound cyst in your life. And it took me a minute to like understand what she was saying to me, to which I had never shared with her what was going on. And she just looked at me. She said, you think you hid everything and you didn't. And the mark on my face He never hit me in my face until that day.
Oh, wow.
And she said, "This is done." And I was like, "Well, we'll talk." And she's like, "No, if you need help, I will get you help." She said, "You have to talk to me." And I wouldn't. And I went through my surgery. And about on my third day of recovery, I just felt lost. And I called for a counseling appointment. And I went in and I kind of gave them my 15-minute dump of my life. And they said, "How old are your kids again?" And I gave them the ages. And they said, "The oldest is a boy." And I said, "Yep." And they said, "You realize he thinks all daddies act this way." And I just went, "What?" And that fog that I had been in, complete clarity. I went home, called a locksmith, had the locks changed. I packed all the stuff, left it in the driveway, told him to come and pick it up, and we were done. And that was it. A couple years later, when I met my now wonderful husband, I had 3 children and he had 2. We fell madly in love almost instantly. We went out on a date while I was planning to move and he was planning to move. And we're like, well, this is silly. And I coached his daughter and my son in soccer, and that's how we met.
Okay.
And so my friends and I across the street from me, we did an adult date. We would go to a movie or go bowling or do something once a month to just keep sanity with young kids, you know? So I asked him if he wanted to come with us. And he was like, "No kids?" I said, "No kids." And he's like, "I'm in." And I said, "But, this is a mistake." I said, "Clearly I like the guy. I'm moving, he's moving. I'm not doing this." She's like, "Just go out with him one more time." So we go out one more time, and I was like, "Yeah, we shouldn't do this. This is not a good idea." Well, by the third date, it was like, okay, now we're in trouble. So 3 months into our relationship, we got engaged. 3 months later, we married, and now we're almost married 30 years.
Aw.
All started with a little 4-leaf clover that he gave me, which I still have.
Tell the story of the 4-leaf clover.
I was coaching this soccer team, and we were really like the bad news bears. It was the misfits of all the teams. During a game, his daughter needed to use the restroom. I said, "Well, make sure you go ask your mom because the restrooms are over there. I don't want you going by yourself." And she's running away going, "Well, my mommy and daddy are divorced. I live with my daddy. He's over there." And I was like, okay, that was a lot of information. So we just started to talk. And on the next game, he said, "Well, I have something for you." And I said, "What's that?" And he handed me 2 4-leaf clovers. He said, "I think you're going to need the help." It's funny. And he finds 4-leaf clovers for me now all the time. I'm not a tattoo girl. I'm needle phobic. And I have a tattoo about that big, size of a quarter. That's a 4-leaf clover. And it's the only one I've got.
I love that story. That is beautiful. Oh my gosh.
So that's why we are the Benner Bunch, because everybody talked to us that we were the Brady Bunch, because technically I could have delivered all of them. It was 9 months, 9 months, 9 months, the top 3.
Okay.
So our boys were for 3 months the same age. So it always confused people, or they grew up in the same house for 20 years, and people to this day still are like, "So whose is whose? How did that work?" We kind of just decided that we were not doing the his and hers thing. It was either going to be all of ours or none. And we actually went to both of our parents and told them the same thing. They said, "There will not be any special treatment for my kids, your kids. They're just our kids."
So your kids were pretty little when you met and grew up together.
Yep.
Over that course of that 20 years. That's great.
And they loved it. They loved being part of a big family.
There's a lot of joy. So you just came from this big family, you had your own big family, and family has always been super important.
It has. When everybody says, what do you want to be when you grow up and stuff? The only constant I always had was I wanted a family. I just always envisioned my life as being a mom, being a grandmother.
Yeah.
And I still think that's probably the best thing I've ever done and the thing I'm most proud of.
Yeah. Oh, I know being a mom is super rewarding. It just becomes your identity.
It does.
Kind of
It does.
supersedes the other parts of the identity, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And for many years when the kids are little, that's, I used to joke on, the aggravating days, like, "I'm changing my name. I am not mom anymore." Like, I'm not answering to mom,
Yes.
You can call me Mrs. Frankenstein if you want to, but I'm not answering to mom.
So it sounds like you just grew into this very happy time.
We did. And it's funny because, we look back on those 20 years and we had ups and downs with exes and then the normal growing family kind of things and financial pressures and job changes and all of that stuff. And it still is, I go back and think like, when people say, well, how did you do that? And I was like, well, there was no other choice. One of the things that we did do that I think helped our sanity, because all of our kids did sports and everything too. So it was a very busy household. As one, we relied on friends. We didn't have any family in town. We worked it out like carpooling or whatever. We were never afraid to ask for help.
Yeah.
Really kind of that it takes a village.
Yeah.
And then like dinner time, like we didn't do dishes right after dinner. We did them after the kids went to bed, or if they were old enough for homework on their own while they were doing homework, we did laundry at night. So that the after school time to the bedtime wasn't about us catching up on work or household chores. It was about spending the time with them. And I have, it was only, I mean, literally like a week ago, I was talking about this to my daughter and I said, I keep thinking, what did we do differently? How did we do it differently? Because, you have the same challenges. You have to be to work. You have to be to school. You've got soccer or dance and dinner and whatever life is throwing you. How do you do it? And I think it was about kind of saying, okay, this time of the day, I'm not going to do all the other stuff.
That's just our time.
Yeah.
That's so great. So then the kids grew up and
Off to college they went. We were still very much a part of their lives, and we'd still do like Sunday dinners, and they were always allowed to bring people home. And when our boys were in college, they could each add a house and home, and they would start bringing kids home. And it was one or two at a time, and then it was like 3 or 4 at a time. And then we finally had to say, Saturday night at 8 o'clock, I need a head count for Sunday.
yeah.
I'm not the kind of person who wants to run out of food. So
So now obviously there's no one at home. The kids are
Mhm.
probably have their own family. I know your grandmother, so
So we have 6 grandchildren and 1 on the way. My great grandmother said that once your first child gets married, have a bag because you'll be wedding baby, wedding baby, wedding baby, and that's pretty much what our life was.
aw.
But we were 6 years ago, almost to the day, we received the most upsetting phone call that any parent wants to receive, and uh, I often think back on it like it was an out of body experience. I was watching it happen to me, but it wasn't me. That our son had passed away, and it literally like was a police officer calling. And I just remember telling my husband, like, I don't think that's right. They're lying. That didn't happen. Like this isn't happening. And it was, while they were all in college and living this wonderful, fun life, our younger son had always, I mean, since he was 2, struggled with authority and struggled with attention issues. And as his counselor had always told us, attention comes in many forms, and it can be good attention or bad attention, but at the end of the day, it's still just attention. He would use things to gain that attention and eventually making bad choices. He studied to be a nurse, and he was a nurse. He knew risks,
Mm.
but he was a risk taker. He would have problems or a flare up, if you will, during prominent times of our life because of the attention seeking part of his personality. And when I tell you, I mean, he was never not under the care of a counselor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist at any point in his life. So I am a firm believer in somebody getting help, and we did. And to the point where he even, did the whatever documents it is that would give us permission to speak with his physicians. But even at that, he could manipulate those situations to his gain when he wanted it. And the funny thing is he was the sweetest boy, funny as all get out, the funniest person in the room by far all the time, and just really couldn't stop that part of his life. He couldn't get a handle on it, and eventually started to mix his prescription medicine. And one time he didn't mix it correctly. And, people often assume that he took his own life, and he did not. He really did have an accidental overdose. It feels the same. He was still gone. The visions I have of his last moments will haunt me forever. And like we say, he will forever be 28.
Yeah.
He really is
Oh,
34.
wow.
And that's a strange thing. We had a friend 2 years prior who lost an adult child, and he told us, he said, yeah, somebody else I knew in this situation called me and said, welcome to the worst club in the world. And after our son passed away, he called and he said, I told you it was the worst club in the world. I worked in senior living at the time, and I counsel families for assisted living and memory care, and life and death was a part of everyday life, and I could deal with it until then. And then I stopped working like that day.
Right.
And I couldn't do it. I couldn't get out of bed. I literally couldn't get out of bed for a very long time. But ironically, we were with my aunt and uncle when we found out, and my uncle's a psychologist, and he's just a wonderful man and has always had this kind heart and this way of getting you through stumbling blocks without you even knowing you were doing it. I spent a lot of time on the telephone with him.
Wow.
But there were one of the things that he told me, and I still find this to be the one of probably the best pieces of advice I've ever been given, and it can apply to so many things, particularly when people get overwhelmed. Like I remember saying, I can't get out of bed. I cannot function. He's like, you don't have to function the whole day. And I was like, what? And he goes, you don't have to. He said, just till breakfast. And I was like, well, what about the rest of the day? He said, if you want to go back to bed, you can. I was like, what? And he goes, and do that for a couple days and then try to function till lunch. Eventually you'll get to dinner, and then eventually you'll get to the end of the day. And then some days you're going to go back to breakfast. And I was like, huh. He says, you're trying to do it all, and it literally can't happen. He said, you can't grieve, you can't process your thoughts, you cannot function. I would be in midstream talking to somebody about something mundane and be crying and not know I was crying. And they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, why? And they're like, well, you're sobbing. And I'm like, what? And the waves would just come over you. And then, our children are feeling that loss and trying to hold it together for them when they needed the support. And I would try so hard to be that support person for them. But the energy that it took to do that would wipe me out for days.
Wow.
And so like we were all doing this crazy cycle, we kind of all had to like, okay, we've got to get our stuff together here. We cannot function. And so we all found little ways to figure out how to go on, and then eventually how to celebrate him and how to talk about it without it being as devastating, although some days it is.
Even still today.
Yeah. We got the news when my husband and my uncle were running in the Marine Corps Marathon 6 years ago, and we're going back there next weekend.
Oh, wow.
I didn't think I could do it, and I'm not sure I can. We're going to give it a try. We were out to dinner when we got the call, and all I kept thinking is, there's no way I'm going anywhere near that restaurant. And like 2 weeks ago, my aunt called me and she said, just wanted to let you know that restaurant closed permanently. I was like, yes. I was like, thank goodness, because that's what I knew was going to be a trigger. I knew it was going to set me off, and I didn't want to go down that hole. So I'm sure there'll be some roller coaster rides there over the weekend,
But it sounds important for you to do somehow.
I think so. I think, people talk about closure, and I don't think there's actually closure. There's management.
That's what they say about grief. It doesn't go away.
Right.
You learn how to live with it.
Right. And I remember hearing people tell my husband and I, you will laugh again, and then you're going to feel guilty that you do. And then you'll laugh again, and then you won't feel guilty that you laughed. And eventually you'll get to a better balance. Some days you're just off, and you just feel off about it, but it's not front and center every minute like it was. And But when we had this whole family dynamic during COVID about wanting to be able to see everybody, and I like just couldn't be that mom that couldn't see her kids for 2 years. I just couldn't do it. And
Me neither.
that would have been just impossible. So instead we moved. When we get together now, we can almost get everybody together.
Mhm.
And we've worked it out with all of the in-laws that we have a holiday schedule, and we really try to keep up with that to the best we can so that everybody can see their siblings as often as possible. And that's been really helpful.
It's just everything you talk about is all this core value of family. It's
Yeah.
just really pervasive in your life, and it's just so beautiful. Even
Yeah.
though there's tragedy in it, it's also, I mean, it's love that's overarching.
It's a funny thing because, when you sit back and you think about the things that happen in your life, we had a lot of not great times. When our oldest was getting married, she was the first, and we just had a blowout weekend. It was wonderful. But on the morning of, we got a call that my mother-in-law suffered an aneurysm and was not doing well. And we're kind of sitting there in the hotel room looking at each other like, what do we do? We were at the time in Ohio, she was in Florida, and what are we going to do? And my uncle was there, and he's like, you have to tell the kids, but you can wait till tomorrow. And so my uncle, my mom, and Greg and I were the only ones who knew anything. And so here, what was on this most joyous occasion, it was like right here in the back of your head, like tomorrow is not going to be joyous. So we really tried to live every moment, but it was, again, these weird little blessings that come in your life. My niece was in Florida, so she was at the hospital, and she said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You keep sending me texts with pictures of the day so I can show them to my mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And so she can see her granddaughter get married. So the day of the wedding, I'm out there with my cell phone and taking pictures, and my daughter's looking at me. She's like, Mom, we have a photographer for that. And I was like, I know, I just want some for my friends. I want them on my phone.
Right.
And I was texting my niece the whole day. The next day, so everybody's at breakfast, and we had to tell everybody. And when I told my daughter, who had just gotten married first, I told her in private with her then husband, and she's like, but she didn't get to see me. I said, yes, she did.
Oh,
And she's like, how? And she went, that's why you were using your cell phone. I said, yep. I said, she saw every bit, the entire day, everything. And she said, you're kidding. And I said, nope. I said, she got to see all of it. And I'm so glad that that's the memory she got out of that, because that could otherwise be like a really
right.
detrimental mark in your life.
Good for that. You protected her from that. You made it into a positive experience for her.
So we try, but I mean, it's life. I remember hearing my mom as she got a little older saying, getting older is hard. I'm thinking she meant, old age kind of ailments, that kind of stuff. And she said, all the people you love in the world, you're watching pass away, and friends.
Mhm.
And in her case, she had some lifelong friends. And like, I really hadn't thought about it like that. And now, now I do. I really do think about that. It's like that is a part of life that can be very challenging, and you have to grasp it while you can and enjoy it while you can. I mean, I used this example when I was counseling family members of people who had cognitive impairment or dementia of some kind. And they said, I'm watching them disappear right before my eyes. I'm experiencing grief, and they're alive and well in front of me. And I said, well, you are. I said, that's exactly what is happening. I said, but stay in their moment. People would look at me and they're like, what do you mean? I said, because you will learn something new about your parent today if you listen to what they have to say.
Yeah.
And they said, why? And I said, if they're talking about something they did in high school, encourage that conversation. I said, I'm telling you, you're going to hear some funny stories because there's no filter. You're
Yep.
getting just the honest
Yeah. Real love.
gush of emotion. My mom passed away when the book was about 80% finished. So I tried to show her as much as I could, and we'd read it together all the time. And after I got the color copy drafts from the printer,
Yeah.
but they were like on sheets of paper. It wasn't bound or anything. And so I guess it was maybe springtime last year that I was up in Stroudsburg, and I kind of did the same route of Philly. And I went to 2 sets of my mom and dad's friends and show them this book and show them what it meant to me and what they meant to me.
Yeah.
And that was just such a good visit. It meant so much to me. It was nice to see these faces have been in my life for 57 years, So even though I couldn't show my mom those pictures, I could show them, and that was really cool. It was just kind of fun. Kind of made me feel like a kid all over
Well, that's
again.
what I was thinking as you were saying that. I was thinking it's like you're almost like you're a kid showing them what you just did. Like you did
Yeah.
an amazing thing. All right, so let's talk about the book again. So you're an author.
Yeah, so that's kind of crazy. Again, I believe in kind of weird things happen and how people come in your life. And this is God's honest, true story. I've always had the idea of writing a book in my head, truly clueless on how to do it. And I was at a Christmas market thing at a convention center in Cincinnati. And I was walking down the hallway, and there's this beautiful booth at the end of the hallway, and it was all white background, these beautiful, vivid images of animals and a few books on the table, really eye-catching. And I walked down to the table, and we started talking to the gentleman there, and he was an author and a professional photographer, and so we started talking. It just was an easy conversation. And we kind of took a few steps away after we were done, and my husband Greg looked at me and he said, "Please go ask him." And I said, "Ask him what?" And he said, "Ask him how to get started." And I was like, "No, I'm not going to bother him." He said, "Please go ask him." I was like, "Okay." So I walked back, and the first thing he said to me is, "I knew there was something on your mind."
Oh.
And I went, "Well," he said, "Have you got a book idea?" And
Oh.
I said, "I do." I said, "But seriously, no idea how to start this." And he said, "Well, I do consulting. Would you like to work with me?" And I was like, "Sure." He was, "Okay, so let me tell you, this is how I do it." He said, "I am an English professor." He said, "So this is not going to be an easy process." And
Right.
he said, "And you have to be able to take constructive criticism." And he said, "You don't have to do everything I say." He said, "But I need to hear your explanations on why you want to do things certain ways. And if you can defend it," he said, "then we will work on that aspect." And so it took a year to write it.
Wow.
It started as a rhyming story that was very short-lived. Then he said, "I want you to just free write
Okay.
and write and write and write until you feel like you've told me the story you want to tell me." And I said, "Okay." So I did that. Just for reference, a typical children's picture book is 32 pages with less than 500 words.
Okay.
My story had 3,500 words. I didn't know the 500 word minimum at that time. And so he purposefully didn't tell me that. And he said, "Okay, so now we're going to start to edit." And I was like, "Okay." He said, "We're going to take out anything that's not important. You're going to build character growth. We're going to talk about how to do that." And so I said, "Okay." And then he eventually kind of slipped in there. And eventually we're going to get to 500 words or less. And I was like, "Oh my gosh."
Wow.
But so, I mean, when I joke, it's editing, editing, and editing. And did I mention to edit and edit and edit and edit? And it really is. And then we got it to a point where I felt pretty happy with it. And he said, "Okay, it's time we go to outside editors." And so he put me in contact with this other editor, and it took the guy like 3 days to get back to me. And he came back to me, and I felt like I was in the first grade and I had more red on my page than I did the pencil. The first paragraph of this gentleman's email to me was, "I love your story, period. Let me repeat myself. I love your story. I think you need to do a little bit more work." He said, "You're not going to think I love it when you read the rest of this document. I need you to understand that I really do love your story." And then I read it, and I mean, there were so many edits and changes and questions, really more questions than why did you do this and why are you doing that, and really making you think about it. So much so that I put the book down, didn't look at it for 3 days, and I was like, "Okay, got to clear my head." And then I basically revamped the whole book.
Okay.
Took out characters, added characters, didn't do everything he asked me to do, did some things completely different, added on to those, then worked with my editor a little bit more, and we cleaned things up. And then he said, "Okay, it's time for you to send it back to him." This time it took him an hour.
Okay.
He sent it back, and he's like, that's the story. I
Oh,
knew you had it. You just had to look a little closer. That was really cool. There were a couple times during this process that really made a difference to me. That day being, that process being one of them. And my editor telling me the whole time, when you write, there's a natural instinct to say, I'm talking to Mitzi. She has medium brown hair. It hangs long. She has a gray sweatshirt. Like to describe you in words, not describe you as your person.
yeah.
And in kids' books, even more so. So he's like, the illustrator's job is to do the images. Your job is to tell the story. If I told the story well enough, your illustrator will be able to see your vision. It's like, so every time I do something, I would cut stuff out. Like, okay, I don't need to tell him he has a blue shirt on. He's going to see a blue shirt. I would cut out words. And then as we're getting down to the nitty gritty, and he's like, okay, so now you're at, pretend I'm giving you $50 for every word you're taking out. It became playful in a game as much as it was challenging. But when I went to give it to the illustrator, I did not tell him anything. He didn't know anything about my grandfather. He didn't know any history about the character. He knew nothing. I literally handed him a Word document with my name on it and nothing else. And everybody said, you didn't give him illustrator notes. You didn't tell him where, you wanted it to look like. And I said, nope. I said, my job was to write the story. His job is to do the illustrations of that story. I said, if I did my job, he'll get it. He sent me back the first 7 sketches and said, is this what you were thinking of? And when I tell you it was spot on, it was spot on. I looked at my editor and I said, oh my gosh, he said, you did your job.
Yes.
And that was the nicest compliment, because you don't, especially as a new writer, you don't know how to criticize yourself and to critique in a positive way without comparing yourself to somebody else or some other type of writing, because children's books are different. There's a different writing process for it. So that was really kind of interesting for me to go through that. The illustrator, Jeffrey Ebler, who is amazing, he's done 50 plus books, said he had never worked with an author directly before. And I found that really strange. And I was like, well, we'd really like it to be the 3 of us working on this together. Yeah. Are you open to that? And he was. Okay, let's do this. Well, but the funniest part about the whole story was they said I needed to call his agent in New York to get a contract. And I thought they were messing with me. I don't know. I was like, yeah. You can call my agent too. And no, she's really in New York. And I was like, oh, wait, what? So that was that immediately became reality.
It's big time.
Yeah, that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Oh, well, it just came out really well. And I love the message. I mean, it's just, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
So I don't want to spoil the story for anyone, but it's definitely, it's really made for children and adults. And it's just,
well, people always ask me
right to the chase. It's got a lot of heart.
People ask me the age group it's targeted to. And I said, well, really, technically 7 and younger. The message is about kindness. And I said, and it really applies to everybody. A realtor came up to me and bought the books for customers that were moving their children. And it's funny because I've had other people say for military families,
I actually thought of immigration when I read it, but it's perfect for anyone going into a new situation.
Yeah.
And anyone who's looking for a welcoming set of arms.
I mean, we talk about our childhood and getting to know people and then being young mothers, and you meet your friends from your children. 90% of the time as a young mother, your friends are parents of somebody else. Well, when you become an adult and you don't have that, making friends and new relationships is challenging. And
welcome to the 50s.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole new ball of wax. And but
there's this is going through your whole life story. There's cycles. There's this time, and it kind of goes around, and then you go to this time and it kind of goes around, and it moves through these cycles constantly. So as you think about that going back, do you notice any patterns or themes, or what stands out to you?
I do think it is a lot of patterns and themes that repeat. I think life is about repetition. And I find that, I remember my mom telling me that when I turned 40, she said, you'll love your 40s. And I said, why? And she said, because you can do whatever you want. She's like, your kids aren't aren't as dependent on you, you getting that freedom. But the thing I guess for me was, and I still try to do it and I try to be better about it all the time, is to make adjustments. Like I told you, my mom told me I was the kid who was black and white. Try to live a little bit more by the gray side now. And, some days I'm better at it than others. Other times I'm not. And I'm still headstrong and I still speak my mind. And sometimes I'm apologetic and sometimes I'm not. I do think that like trying to learn from it or to go back to the basics.
Right.
I use my uncle's theory of you don't have to do everything all in one day.
I love that.
Get through breakfast. And so when I have friends who are going through something challenging, I use that as an example. You don't need to take care of everything today.
Yep.
The rest of it will go on. I remember when we were losing our parents and thinking we were on this carousel and we were just going in circles and circles just to get through the day, but life was still going on around me. And eventually we needed to just jump off. So when we jumped off, how were we going to do this? How were we going to learn from it? How were we going to be better at it? We try to do that. We try to do it with our grandchildren now. We try to be very present. The whole reason we did this move was so that when we are all together, you are more present.
Yeah.
You're not worried about rushing to go from here to there all the time. We do family vacations with all of us.
I love that.
All adults, all
I
kids
can't wait to
under
do that
one
with
roof.
my kids. Mine are not quite at that stage, but very soon. I'm gonna love doing that.
And it's important for the kids to understand about making adjustments. We use that phrase because our son's baseball coach used to say, life is about many adjustments. You got to make a slight correction to get it right. And if you just keep making the corrections, eventually you kind of find your path.
That's perfect. So because this is the Blessons podcast, the lessons, I hear two big lessons that the two that you just said. The making adjustments and the idea that you don't have to eat the whole elephant at once. You start with one little toe. You get through a little part of the day. You figure out how to move in small increments until you get the whole thing accomplished. So is there anything else, any other major lessons you've had over the course of your life?
Love deeply.
Yes.
Love deeply. Love with all your heart. Sometimes you take chances on things. I was never really good at like protecting my heart, whether it was with friends or family or your spouse. It was either like that all or nothing kind of thing. And you do get hurt occasionally because somebody doesn't reciprocate that. One of the things that my husband and I said right from the beginning, like we kind of said, okay, what are the lines in the sand right in the beginning of our relationship? And we each had two, and they were the same two things. The thing that we both learned about from being married before was we were the ones who wanted to be married. We wanted the family. And just because we may not have chosen the right person the first time doesn't mean that what we wanted, we needed to give up on. We just needed to find the right person to live that life with. A lot of people get a little gun shy and they don't want to kind of live life fully. And I think you should. You don't know how long you're going to have. I mean, I go back to saying, my parents lived this wonderful life and then lost everything in a moment. But you know what? My parents' life was all about living in the moment. They just, lived life big and lived life small and lived life big again. And they just reinvented themselves. And I guess I'm kind of like that.
Where the gray area comes in.
Yeah.
So you have to go in, you have to put your heart into it, even though there's going to be pain.
Yes, it's like, okay, so what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to fall on my face. Okay. Well, I have done that once or twice before. Yes. I'm sure I could get over it again.
And then you imagine that happening and then, okay, well, how would I handle it if that happens? And then adjustments like you were talking about before.
Are you going to get up? Are you going to brush yourself off? Are you going to go forward? Or are you just going to sit there and fall into the earth? And so like, I don't think you have to make huge changes. And I guess because even now, like I get overwhelmed easily. I mean, this whole book thing has been overwhelming. I mean, the technology part of things is so frustrating. And I sometimes sit there and I'm like, what in the world did I do? But I've gone back to it takes a village. I ask my kids for help. I ask
the team,
other professionals that, might do social media and like, please help me because I'm failing at this miserably, and because you don't know what you don't know. You kind of have to teach yourself once you figure it out.
But that's like your whole life has been, you had this huge family and now you kind of have these other people who are your team members. It's like the way that you function, and
Yeah.
that's like beautiful. You really work well in a whole,
And I think it's important,
moving
people tell you to surround yourself with good people. I remember being younger and thinking, how do you do that? How do you seek out good people? I think one of the ways is be a good person.
Yes.
Be somebody that somebody can trust you. Do the right thing because it's the right thing, not for any other reason. And I think when you start doing some of those little things, the rewards become really big. Even just with this book, I have people send me videos of them with their children or grandchildren reading the story and Gabalucci, and they're having fun saying the Italian words that are in there. And that's why I did it, to make it fun.
Yes.
And
Arrivederci.
yes, and when I read it to groups, I make them all say it with me, and we just do that. But I think it is that like level of trust, and people see that.
But that's in your book at the end, he
Yeah.
trusts. And that's when the others see that you have to trust.
Yep.
Benefits of doing that, and that sometimes if you trust someone, and that's not in your book, but you can get hurt. But
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny when people ask me what the story's about, in a nutshell, I just say it's a little Italian wolf leaving home for the first time and trying to make new friends. And he stumbles a lot, and then he figures it out and gets his groove, and he's good. Life is hard.
that's exactly, it's such a metaphor. I mean, the book it's beautiful. It's just,
Oh, well, thank
so what
you.
about the blessings? What are your biggest blessings?
Definitely family and children and grandchildren, and being able to maybe not do the same things for the kids and grandkids, but that I had, but something that they can hold on to that is important, where they can say, I'm Gigi and my husband's Pappy, and well, we do this at Gigi and Pappy's house, and when they know that they can count on us. And I think that's the biggest thing, is I always want them to know that they can count on us. I want to be a part of their lives and to watch them grow. And I think that is a fascinating thing, because again, you're not the primary caregiver. So you don't have all of the headache. My mom used to tell us all the time, being a grandparent was the best job in the whole world. And she's right. It's just that simple. She was just right. And people say, oh, you get to spoil them and hand them back. Well, no. If you're a good grandparent, you're disciplining them, and that they know that they can't step all over you, and that they can count on you when they need it, and then that you can comfort them when they're hurt or they're upset.
Because that's where trust comes from.
Exactly. And, when they grab your little hand in theirs, and, it's just the sweetest thing ever. They all do such fun little things, and watching them grow is fascinating to me. I love seeing the creativity, the daredevilness, the sassiness in our granddaughters that just think that they can conquer the world.
And what they're seeing you accomplish is so meaningful as well.
And we've tried to involve them as much as possible. Matter of fact, I was working on making a coloring book to go with the book, and I was at my daughter's house, and my oldest grandchild, Claire, we were working on like puzzle pages inside the coloring book. And I said, well, I think I've got all the pages. And I was having her help me do it. And I said, what do you think? What do you think? She's like, it's great, Gigi. Where's your key page? And I was like, what? She says, you need an answer key page. And I was like, oh, yeah, I do. And I didn't even think about it. I'm thinking, okay, so my 7-year-old granddaughter is schooling me on how to put the answering key in the book.
There's always something to learn. So if you look back at your life and you had to say, what was the meaning of my life? What's the meaning? What would you say?
I think about that all the time, because I wasn't the person in school who said, I want to be a doctor and had that vision. For me, it was being a parent, finding the joys and the sadnesses, and then the triumphant celebrations, and all of it mixed up together. For me, that was the foundation.
Yeah.
And I think it was the foundation that was instilled in me when I was a child, and I just knew I wanted that.
Yeah.
So if there was any one constant thing for me, it was having a family, being a parent, being a grandparent, and being that person, not saying, I'm a grandmother and doesn't see her grandchildren.
Yeah.
I mean,
Walking the walk.
yeah, totally.
That's amazing. So what's next for you?
A lot of the stuff with the book is new. I need to do it at my pace. And if I don't do it at my pace, I'm not going to do it well. And the worst thing that I want to do is to overmarket something that I can't deliver. I want to be confident if I'm going in front of a school. if I'm in front of a group of children? Can I adjust if it's a different age group than I thought it was going to be? It's still that life lesson of learning the ropes. So it's a new career. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And every day I learn something new.
Love that.
So it's
Is there
right,
another book
right.
in you, or you
So
think?
there's one completely new story,
Okay.
and then there's another Gabalucci story. The illustrator for this story said that he would do the second if I wanted to do it. So that's great. And so now it's just kind of taking the ride and seeing where it's going. People ask a lot, like, do I want to be in Barnes and Noble and do I want to be on Amazon and do those things? And I said, no, not right now, because they really are for a bigger publishing venue than what I'm doing right now. So, for now, I'm going to sell the books. I have them locally in a few stores here. I'll have them in a few stores in Ohio and Pennsylvania and selling them online, and then going to festivals and schools and stuff like that. So when this came, it seemed like it was just the right time to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's so important. Children's literature, and there's so much good quality literature. And I would say your book just falls into that
Oh,
category. It's
thank you very much.
such an
That's very
important book.
nice.
It's extremely well written. So you're
Oh, thank
it's
you.
great. I love it.
Oh,
Well, I just want to thank you so much for spending all this time. It's just so I've really I used to tell my students this all the time whenever they wrote anything personal that they gave to me to read. I really truly think of it as an honor when someone shares their personal life with me and their story. And I think that your story it has so much positive impact that it could have on people who listen, just on a whole variety of different subject matter. That's where we get the jewels of life, by listening to each other's stories. So I thank you again.
oh, I appreciate that. It's been a fun journey, and I hope it continues. And I, like you, like to hear other people's journeys, and like we said, make those little adjustments. Like, hey, that sounds like a really great way to do something. Let me try that and see. I mean, because the worst part that can happen is you try and it doesn't work out. Oh well.
But you
Oh,
always get something out of it. You'll always learn something from it, and then you get to be better for it. I love that. That's my
oh,
favorite part of life.
indeed, indeed. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.